space. I sense her touch. She's warm and being light.
Well, welcome to Dr. Fred Bell's Health, Science, and Energy Show. Show number 1 underway. Can you believe that? We're going to have a lot to talk about, and that was a little bit of music from an album that I did back in 1987. I played that all over Europe. It's called The Fellowship. And what we're going to do starting today, I guess, is Fellowship. And I think you'll like some of the music that you'll hear off and on throughout the show. But welcome to my show. And I hope to have a lot of interaction. We're going to cover a lot of interesting things. Over the coming months. The first hour or two, I just sort of want to introduce myself, not to honk my own horn about what I've done, but I've done so many shows around the world, and people always get my background wrong and make things up that never happened and leave things out that did, so that it kind of is confusing for a lot of people. So what I'm trying to do is set the record straight out of my mouth and not someone else's. It sure is a beautiful day here in Laguna Beach. We're broadcasting this from the top of a mountain, looking out over the ocean. It's pretty nice. Unfortunately, it's pretty polluted out there. It never used to be. Anyhow, my beginnings, humbly beginnings, started back about, well, during World War II, if you can imagine that. And I just can't believe all the decades I've watched go by. And so I'm going to share some of them with you, step by step by step. We'll have websites to look at and phone numbers to call and books to talk about. A lot of different things will be happening over the period of these shows. We're going to be sharing a lot of things with you that are very important, I feel. And if you don't, well, send me emails or whatever. And I guess my existence, as far as I remember, started about 60 years ago in this world. It was a warm August day when all of this began. And it was kind of, I was having a few things go on just before I stepped into this world. I remember just a few things that happened briefly before I took my breath here. So let us begin. Well, I believe my memories started just a little bit before I was born. I was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, back during World War II. And I do remember, it was interesting, just before I woke up in the University of Michigan hospital, I remember talking to a woman in a spaceship, believe it or not. It was like a dream almost now. And later on I was able to reflect when I was in kindergarten, actually nursery school, in the 4 years old, on my past life in the Third Reich, which I'll get into in a few minutes. But having just left that life, moving into this one, it was kind of an experience. And I remember saying goodbye, and I remember waking up in my body and saying to myself, oh, darn it, I can't move my arms, my legs, I'm going to have a language problem, I know all this. And I just remember that so well. And then I looked up, and when I looked up, I saw 4 people looking down at me, which was kind of interesting, and they all had these green outfits on. And I described these in later years to my mother, and she said these were Henry Ford's personal physicians. Norman Miller, I guess, was quite a guy at the time. In those days, physicians were rock stars. And my dad worked for Henry Ford Sr., and so because my dad was in his favor somewhat, he lended his personal physicians to the hospital to deliver me and bring me into this world. So it was kind of interesting. My mother could never understand how I remembered that, but that's what happens when you got a memory like mine. It just doesn't go away. Sometimes I think it's a curse, and sometimes I think it's a gift, depending on the mood I'm in. So anyway, that was the beginning of my life on this planet, my sojourn here, as you might say. Anyway, as life progressed, living in Ann Arbor, Michigan was kind of interesting. Later on, it became a blessing in disguise because I was able to have full access to facilities at the University of Michigan, where I spent a huge amount of my time. I remember in nursery school, we used to lay on these little green cots, army cots, and I would flash on at that time I didn't quite understand what it was, but now I understand it better. It was my past life in the Third Reich, and I, in that time, was an archaeologist working for Hitler, and actually Himmler was my boss, and under him was a guy named Reinhard Heydrich, who I did not like at all. And some of the things they had me do was explore the metaphysical side of life, even though I was actually an authenticator. When Hitler, for example, raided the Louvre, they took over 4,000 paintings from the Louvre and brought them up to Berchtesgaden, where Hitler's compound was, which is in the south of Germany, in the Bavarian Alps. Very beautiful place. And I was not a Hitler fan, just so you understand that. It was just where I was at the time, and I had to deal with it, and I dealt with it at the time. And I remember looking over these 4,000 paintings that he'd stolen from the Louvre and finding out about a third of them were fakes. And so it was really interesting. He gave them to the Reich Air Marshal Hermann Goering, who had a place right down the road from Hitler's place, about a mile away. And it was interesting, at the end of World War II, they'd had a falling out, and Hitler was up in the Führerbunker up in Berlin, burning himself up and cyaniding himself with his family, and Goering was making a run from Switzerland. He got caught by the conquering generals at the time, and on his private train headed out for Switzerland, and on the train were all these fake paintings that he thought were real. So I guess Hitler had the last laugh, because they didn't seem to get along too well at the end. The other thing that was really interesting is that in this lifetime, I started working with a lot of the people that worked in the Third Reich. At the end of World War II, a lot of people are not aware of the fact that we had a thing called Operation Paperclip, where all the top generals and scientists of the Third Reich that weren't deemed non-harmful or they were humanitarian types, they brought them over here and put them to different positions in our science and society. And I had the honor of working with about 4 of them. So it was kind of interesting in me being born in an American body with a memory of the Third Reich, working with a general or a scientist like Werner von Braun, who I worked with, and having conversations with them and not really letting them know that I knew as much as they probably did on some of this stuff, and just kind of seemingly well informed on our conversations, which kind of amused them somewhat. At the University of Michigan, the first guy I worked with was a guy named Dr. Katz. And it was really funny, because a few years ago, back in the mid-'90s, I was up at a place called the Bodhi Tree giving a seminar, and he had just been there. And he was like almost 100 years old, but he still was quite functional. So when I heard that he had been there recently, I thought it was quite karmic, to say the least. Anyway, getting back to the University of Michigan, I started there. I was actually attending Tappan Junior High School. I was in the 8th grade. And at night, I was fortunate enough to go over there at night and spend a lot of time in the night sessions that they were having with the different professors and the different students. And I started at the very beginning studying thermonuclear fusion and the effects of what's called the pinch effect, and the effects of the bomb, the shock waves that a huge amount of heat an electromagnetic pulse produces when a bomb goes off, whether it be in the air, whether it be on the ground, or somewhere in between, or even underground. So those were the kinds of studies I was doing, and I also was learning about the effects of radiation on people, because back during the Manhattan Project, which is in the earlier 40s, when they were working on the development of the thermonuclear device, probably the atomic bomb being the main thing, they had a lot of mishandling of nuclear radiation and radioactive substances stored